Your head looks great.
Oh, okay.
Did you recently shave it?
No,
No?
I'm fuzzy.
Oh. Well, looks shiny on camera. Do you get it polished? Or not really? I'm curious. You could tell
I
Joe
put
Rogan does.
moisturize on it.
Okay. Like you could
No
tell
one
Joe.
gets their head polished.
I don't. What do you mean?
No one gets their head polished.
I feel like I've seen that before.
As a joke, maybe, but it's not a
What?
real bald head polishing.
Yeah, like I see people sometimes, like even like on some like wipes, like, and then
It's moisturizer.
okay. I mean that makes
I'm
sense because
looking
it's
this up
skin.
now.
I feel like that's a thing. There's definitely a polish. I've seen people take rags to it and they probably put moisturizer and some
Bald
cream
head
on it. But
balm or a bald head polish. It's the
yeah,
first I'm ever seeing of it.
yeah, I knew it
I
was a
don't know that
thing.
I'd want to put that on my head.
Yeah, I mean, I used to put balm on my beard and shit, and I couldn't imagine if that was just like on my head.
Bald head polish. What the fuck?
You're gonna start going into a video swirl of just people doing that. You should step up your barber game, dude. Start offering that to your bald clients.
Offer a spit shine at the end of my service.
There you go. Which head we
That
talking
didn't
about?
sound right.
Okay, so we are probably having the most informative streak of episodes that we've had yet. Last week, we did the second segment of the history of Reticulated Python going from 1970 up until 2014. And then
Can't
today,
lie, I'm anxious to get back to those.
yeah. No, I'm excited. And what we have coming up for you guys, Nathan, tell them a little bit about what today's episode is, and then we'll cover what the next two are going to be.
Yeah, so I mean, this is definitely important to anyone dealing with locality specific reticulated pythons. So we're talking about what makes a pure locality python a pure locality python.
Yeah.
You know,
And
there's a lot of things that you hear around the forums and, you know, a lot of, again, misinformation that we want to clear up and, you know, just go through our process of, you know, how we can feel confident about getting into a locality.
yeah. And before we jump any further into that, next week we are going to be talking about a specific line of pure localities, and we're going to go through and apply kind of the information today to see if it is what it is. And then the week after that, we're back into the final segment of the history of reticulated pythons. So you guys are in for an awesome month of the ReticLounge. Yeah.
Lucas is making me wait an extra 2 weeks. Damn it.
Right. Right. I mean, I feel like we got to space them out, or else all of our views will go in 3 weeks and then we're back to nothing. Okay.
If it were up to me, though, that would have been back to back to back. I'm just so into it.
Well, I want to hear your guys' feedbacks. After we do all three of them, would you guys like for us to put out an episode of the three of them all combined so that it's a single episode for you guys to, and not like we would leave out the intro and stuff like that for each of the episodes, but just like the informative content for each one? Let us know in the comments below. Before we jump in, our Patreon's popping. If you guys want to join the ReticLounge. Patreon, our members have been great, and I'm excited to jump in. So whether you're just getting into retics or you've been breeding for years, the first place you want to visit is Stewart Design. More and more breeders keep showing up at shows, on Morph Market, and are all over social media. Sometimes it may feel possible to get anyone's attention. Stewart Designs helps small businesses like yours do big things through brand clarity, helping entrepreneurs to start and scale businesses that are easy to know and love. Their work can help any company or industry, but they've done a ton of work for ours. Stewart Design created the brands for USARK, Canova, Reach Out Reptiles, Coiled, and dozens of other well-known reptile breeders. Like many of us, the owner of Stewart Design, Blake, is a keeper and breeder who fell in love with retics through first working with Garrett Hartle. Although Stewart Design does a lot of corporate work, Blake has a passion for working with people in the reptile industry. Stewart Design can help if you're just getting started or you're ready to take things to the next level. You're struggling to stand out and build your presence online or at shows? You don't want to be like the other guys or get lost in the crowd, and you want to make your own way doing what you love. And also, you have big ideas and know your business is special, but you need help sharing it with the reptile community. If something here resonates with you, reach out to Blake and have a conversation. To learn more or get started, visit stewartdesignbrands.com or call them at 855 SD Logos. Clear brands own markets. Stewart Design helps create them. If you are in the market for an enclosure for your reticulated python or any other one of your reptiles, Focus Cubed Habitats is your one-stop shop for not only the best looking cages on the market, but also provide amazing features and add-ons to your cages. We partnered with Focus Cubed Habitats because they continue to innovate and change the way we house our animals unlike any other caging company out there. Their cages are designed intelligently and provide the most stylish and secure housing for your animals' comfort and well-being. Visit focuscubedhabitats.com for your animals' caging needs. Again, visit focuscubedhabitats.com for some amazing and stylish enclosures.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the ReticLounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Looking for the perfect accessories for your hatchlings or juvenile retics? Look no further than HeliGuy Serpents. Our sponsor, Chris Sexton, is coming in hot with an amazing 3D printer, creating top-notch perches and other caging accessories for your beloved pets. Enrich your retics environment with their high-quality products. Use our promo code TRL10 for a 10% discount on your purchase. Visit them today at HeliGuySerpents.com and start giving your pets the best. HeliGuy Serpents, the premier source for 3D printed caging accessories. Again, that's www.heliguyserpents.com and use our promo code TRL10 for 10% off all of your 3D printed accessories today.
Nathan, let's first, so in terms of like pure locality pythons, we're so because me and you are just in the reticulated python game, like as far as the animals we keep right now,
Yeah.
even though I'm sure that we have some information about the way other people do things, but we're going to really be sticking to the reticulated python and what pure localities are here. And then I just want to throw out a disclaimer before I let Nathan kind of jump into some of the points that we're going to talk about. A lot of this is what me and Nathan use, but a lot of this is what we learned through our mentors. And what's also just kind of common, how we commonly, like as an industry, are identifying what's a locality retic. So, Nathan, let's talk about why it's important in the first place to even like have a standard on how we do this.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start off with why locality and making sure you're getting the right locality was important to me when I got into super dwarf reticulated pythons. Uh, if you've been following any of my stuff, you know that I work with heavy Calitoa to small percentage Jampea crosses. So my establishing girl was 75% Calitoa, 12.5% Jampea. Back at that time, I don't think unless you were digging through, the Retic Nation forums, and I didn't even know that that was a thing when I was looking at reticulated pythons. You know what the importation looked like. You know how many hands they had to cross to make it to the breeder that sold them to me. All I knew is that Calitoa was one of the smallest localities, and that I needed to find the highest percentage Calitoa snake to be able to confidently get into reticulated pythons.
Right. Yeah, when you guys are looking for specific locality stuff, or you hear, if you guys are looking for localities, like pure localities, this plays a part. Or if you guys are looking for like crosses and making sure that they are the localities and representative, it's important that I think that we have like a standard and way of doing that. Um, and one thing I just want to mention is there are people out there that have a great reputation in terms of locality and identifying what localities are. And so a lot of people buy animals from individuals that have these reputations and don't bother to do their independent research, and not necessarily saying that's wrong, but like even for me, right? Like people will come to me and said, "Hey, um I heard you work with locality stuff. What do you have available?" I tell them, I have Coyote, I have Kalatoa, I have some Philippines available. And some people will purchase these animals from me and not ask me a single question about the background history. And like it's awesome that people put that trust into me. But like when they say yes, I'm like, okay, here's the information. I give it to them anyways, because I try to encourage everybody to just do your own homework, even if you're buying from um, people that have a much better reputation and just are more of a long-standing breeder than I am. So it's important that we have standards and a way of tracking these things, and that's kind of what we're going to go through a little bit today.
Yeah. And I think as a locality person yourself, that's extremely, extremely important to you.
Yeah,
It's definitely important to me. I want to make sure that I'm representing my animals in the correct way. But I think it's also like, locality in my world is more important in terms of size and color and that kind of thing. So,
yeah, yeah. They play a different role in regards to morphs than just the pure stuff. But I mean, I also think it's important, like with morphs, right? Like when we're trying to selectively breed for a specific trait or something like that. You want to make sure that your locality data is good. So I think that that's a really good point.
yeah.
So first, first and foremost, this is all something that we're doing informative, no hidden agenda. We're just going to put information out there. And I want to start with just debunking some of the common myths and statements that many make about pure locality retics.
Okay.
So,
So, first one that comes to my mind when I'm digging through any kind of argument on any page about this being a legit locality is where's the paperwork, Lucas?
right. What's your thoughts and your what you first thought, and then what you know now? I'm curious on what that's like for you.
In my mind, like I'm thinking about the importation process and I'm thinking about these animals making their way all the way from Indonesia. And yeah, I would love to think that there's a detailed list of everything in that box and really labeled out in localities and everything like that. But you have to realize that it's coming from Indonesia. Like there's going to be a language barrier. There's going to be just they might not care as much about localities over there. It's whoever's shipping out that box, they're worried about just getting those animals over.
Right.
So uh the first thing that comes to my mind is I've never seen any paperwork for any of these pure localities ever.
Right, right. And I would challenge all of you who own pure locality animals to go back to the breeder that you got it from and follow the steps that we're going to provide here and try to see if there's paperwork, because I really want to just like talk about the idea that unfortunately locality retics was important for like a handful of people prior to the Lacey Act ban.
And we
And
we don't have an equivalent of AKC or anything like that for
right,
snakes, reptiles,
not
at
not
least that I'm aware of.
No, not yet. I'm hoping that we get there, right? Like I'm hoping that the standard starts to get better and we can at least start from somewhere and then start tracking, right? And I think that that would be cool, but guy, I mean, I have been digging into locality information since I got into this, and I have only seen paperwork from one person, and that paperwork are just the receipts of someone purchasing those animals off of the importer. R&B Reptiles has paperwork for some Karumpas, for some Bentang Sulawesi's, for Ternates, for Halmaheras. Like he has some receipts of just getting it from the importer. Now, if you go to the importer and you ask for the CITES paperwork, the CITES,
CITES.
sites,
Yeah.
whatever, most of them probably aren't even going to have it. And so I just want to just start off right there, that this idea of like paperwork, I think what really people are talking about is this idea of like a paper trail, which we're going to get into, and um what a paper trail means when it comes to locality information. So, first myth being debunked: if you want actual paperwork, you're not going to find it. If you want the paperwork that says this is where the animal came from and you got it from the importer, very unlikely that you will ever find it. There's probably less than a handful of people that have it, and out of those handful of people, most of them don't even breed and sell to the public. So good luck asking them to share that information with you. Um, so
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to a trust thing a little bit. I mean, sure,
yeah,
you can look at identifying factors on that snake, color, pattern, saddle count, that kind of thing, but you're trusting the word of, whoever's selling that animal here in the States. And even past that, I mean, you're then having to trust the word of the importer if you can get information leading back all the way to the importer.
yeah. And importers are not always the easiest to get a hold of. It took me a while to get a hold of Dan Maliri at one point. It took a bit for me to get a hold of Cameron at Bushmaster. It took a while for me to talk to Eric Keister at Fascination Herbs. But I want to jump into like the second biggest thing that I want to debunk, that I hear a lot. And for me, it's a little, I mean, I understand where the argument is coming from, and it's a totally valid point. And I think this
I
is
also think a little impossible too.
right, right. And so what we're referring to is the idea that we hear a lot of people say, well, if you weren't there to collect the animal from the wild, and on that specific island, do you really know what island it came from? And to those people that say that, you know what? You got me. Like you
First of all,
got
you would have to smuggle that animal.
well, yeah, now, yeah, exactly.
So
Um,
having I picked this out of the wild Kalatoa doesn't really look good on any of us, especially you.
Right. Now I will say there's people like Wolfgang where he went out to the wild, he saw some animals, he had an exporter, and this was before the Lacey Act ban, and hand selected some wild animals and then had field collectors collect them, and he brought them back into the country. That's again, that's as rigorous and as legit as it's gotten. But Wolfgang doesn't sell to the public. His animals, he just doesn't do that. But
Is he
uh,
in the US?
he is. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So he's
I thought I thought he was across the pond for sure.
no, so he
I
was
haven't
born
really interacted with him,
he,
so
he's born across the pond, which is why his keeping standards and everything is so drastically different than a lot of us. I'm pretty sure he's the only one who's actually gone and um I know I'm on Dan Maliri's Patreon, and he has some really good information. And so he goes out there, he's out in Indonesia, he goes to the places. He
that's what
he
I think of is talk to the people that are over there either regularly or have been over there recently. I mean, Daniel Solis as well is a great resource for, just cat or wild pictures of these animals so you can compare them to your captive animals.
Right. Dan Maliri does a lot to establish his whole importation process. He goes out there, he selects the facility, he selects the people, he gets the proper licenses, he has the people that he talks to, the exporters, like he selects all that
He
kind of stuff.
lives out there, he has family
Right.
out there, like, yeah, the connection runs deep.
Right. But outside of those two examples, let me talk about how in every reptile species, localities are assigned and given by the exporter and importer relationship, and then they're dispersed to the hobbyists and to the breeders. And it's a wildly accepted, or a widely accepted thing in the carpet python community, the green tree python community, the scrub python community, boas, all these other species where we are going based off of the importer got this locality, and then we are trusting that information. So to say in retics that like, well, if you weren't there, then we can apply that to every single species of reptiles, and guess what? Then at that point, every locality data from every single species is illegitimate, right? So I don't like that argument, um, because there's a difference that I want to kind of caveat into. Um, but before, like we even caveat into like what a pure locality is to us as hobbyists versus like scientifically.
Us as herpetoculturists, or
Right, right.
however Glenn says it all fancy.
Yeah, herpetoculturist, whatever. But so one thing that I really liked that the Green Tree Python community did,
Yeah.
is they really learned that early on that like, okay, well, we're not going to be out there in the wild, and so everything that they refer to with localities is types, right? So there's a root type, and what they mean by that is they're, arus and green tree pythons are known to have white speckling, super vibrant greens, produce all yellow neos, um, and so when those animals are imported and they look like a ruse and they're told from importation that they're a ruse, they call them Aru types. Same thing with Maru types. And this goes across the board in the green tree python community. And, you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, the first time I heard a locality debate or discussion was on NPR, and they were just talking about, Morelia localities. And to be honest, it sounded a lot more advanced than where we are in the retic community.
yeah. And sadly, it goes back to what we were talking about. It's just people in retics, when we started importing and we started realizing there were morphs and stuff, we just didn't really keep or consider locality data. It wasn't the agenda for the majority of retic keepers early on until, we decided to, well, not we decided, but there was that ban with the Lacey Act, and then people were like, shit, let me import, you know locality stuff.
Yeah, and now it's going back to us talking to people in Indonesia and different parts of that area and trying to determine where genetic stripe or where golden child, or where any of these morphs originated from, looking back and
Right.
talking to people over there.
So let's get into this next point, to kind of combat that whole, well, if you weren't there, then how do you really know? Right. Because if we use that mindset, all of us are sitting on a throne of lies. There's no such thing as any pure locality, anything. And yeah, that just, so I think it's important to differentiate what a pure locality is to a herpetoculturist versus like a biologist or scientist, and like how that differs. And before we go into this, I want to give Glenn a shout out. He was having a discussion, not even, it wasn't even aware in our Patreon that this was going to be a thing that we recorded today, and this happened the day before. And I asked him if we could use some of the information that he was putting on there because it was very valid. So Nathan, talk about kind of that first point in regards to like what the difference really is.
Yeah. So, are you talking about the GPS coordinations?
Yeah, yeah, like that's a big part
Yeah.
of it.
So, I mean, with a biologist and like differing between us as herpetologists or whatever we want to call ourselves, hobbyists,
Herpetoculturist, hobbyist.
herpetoculturists. All right, Glenn would be proud. But getting GPS coordinates of where the animal was located, and then they would need to extract, blood samples and DNA from that animal to be able to compare against our captive populations.
Right. So like a big thing in science, right? Because we have a professor here in the States that works with retics, Raul Diaz, and we were, I think back a while ago when we were getting importations and animals and stuff, someone who had like receipts and stuff was like, hey, can you use my animals here in the United States to take samples of so that we can actually have some data in regards to these localities? And the answer was no, because in science what they need to do is you literally need to have the GPS coordinates of where you caught that animal, in order for it to be without a doubt scientifically legit that this animal came from this GPS, you know, coordinate on this island next to this tree. Like that's how.
Yeah, pinpoint it.
Right. And that to me is the same argument of, well, if you weren't there when they caught it, then you don't know, right?
Well,
And
and
so
the DNA, on the west side of Kalatoa or the east side of Kalatoa could be
could
different,
yeah,
and we're talking about islands that are close enough where there could be intermingling of island localities, so, there could be differences just based on where you found that animal.
right. And so um that is why as a hobby, and that's why as a community we have different standards than the if you weren't there then you don't know what it is. When we look at the captive population, what we identify as a pure locality just wouldn't meet scientifically sound data due to the animal not meeting that criteria that we just talked about. But the way that we determine it is number one, the animals have to have sufficient lineage and data that can be traced back to importation or as close as importation as possible. And Nathan made a very good point in regards to the people that we talk to and their reputation and how trustworthy really make a big difference in that.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
extremely selective on who I buy animals from just because I have to, you know, trust you at least on some level that these animals are gonna be what you say they are.
yeah. When you purchase an animal, like I mentioned before, you gotta it's worthwhile for you to say where'd you get the parents or where'd you get the parents of the baby I'm buying. um if you produce them, where'd you get the grandparents, and then confirming and getting the information either from the breeder and confirming it, or you can take it as is, right, if that's what you want to do. I'm annoying. I like to go back as far as possible, which is why I was blocked from Eric Keister after I asked him a bunch of questions. Um, which who imported my Kalatoas, and he asked me. He's like, he gave me the information, confirmed everything, and then the next day I messaged him and was like, hey, if you don't mind me asking, like when I tried to ask him, hey, if you don't mind me asking, do you, when you got animals in from shipments, did you ever have any mixed bags or anything like that? And literally, I checked my messages and was blocked. I was like, okay, so he obviously doesn't like to talk to people who are scrubs in the community when they want to get some information. But so yeah, you want to try to trace back. And so what we consider a pure locality in this country is identifying what the locality is and then going back to importation if absolutely possible. Um, and then yeah, you can use things like comparing them to um, other animals in that population from confirmed bloodlines. Like you can use the visual cues, but I would say in the Jampianus genus, um, there's overlap, I think, with each island that I've seen some Kalatoas that look busier than some Karampas and vice versa. And I've seen some
Yeah.
Madus that don't have the open back that we associate them with. So you got to be very careful when you're doing that kind of stuff. Now
Yeah,
it's
you
with
have to be careful, but it also comes back down to, do we know what a Kalatoa is supposed to look like? Do we know what a Madu is supposed to look like? Do we know what a Jampea, you know, depending on where you found that animal, like it could be drastically different.
right. Um, so,
They're not all
if
just gonna a carbon copy of each other, you know.
right. And then let's say there's animals in questions, and we're actually going to, we're going to start to kind of get into example of pure locality retics, and like just we're going to give you some information on their lineage data that we compiled and did a little bit of research prior to this episode. Um, but you're going to see some of the information that's on here, on some of these localities that we have, that getting information from the importer is still questionable, but how reputation and that person's motives and when they got the animal, um and whether that animal at one point switched localities or maintained the same information throughout the time, is is really important. So, um, Nathan, why don't we start with the very first locality that we have on our list and the information, um, Madu, since that's a pretty hot locality, and a lot of people want it.
Yeah, I have a friend here locally that that's the prize of his collection is his Madu stuff.
Bread and butter.
Um, so Madus, Garrett Hartle is producing F2 Madus. F1s were acquired by Garrett from Jonathan Holflich. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'm not
Yeah.
super familiar with him. And that
Also,
also needs to be confirmed.
yeah, when we were going through and doing this, I'm pretty positive that Garrett got them from Jonathan Holflich. But that would just need to be confirmed. So Garrett, if you're listening and you want to throw this out in the comments, let us know. Yeah,
Yeah.
continue.
So Jonathan supposedly obtained them from Rodney over at R&B. R&B obtained that mail from Adam Tawfiq. Sorry, these names I'm not sure
Yeah,
if I'm pronouncing correctly. So if I'm offending anyone,
I
my
think it's
bad.
Tafik or something like that. But yeah,
Yeah. And the female, no recollection of who the female was obtained by, but was obtained as a module locality retic as early as 2008, 2009. So importation back then was wide open. It's very easy that we could find paperwork or paperwork. We should have importation info. It would just require a little bit more digging.
right. So I mean, and when I was getting this information, I spoke to Rodney himself, and Rodney was, Rodney is. There's even a post on when I was looking back through all the information. There's even a post where Garrett, I think back in 2018, I would have to go back into my phone. I'm not going to do that, but a few years back, Garrett posted a picture of Amadu, and someone asked him, "Where did you get it from? Or what line is this?" And he said, "R&B Reptiles." And that was on the US Superdorf page, and I was able to see that, and I was like, okay, so Garrett's line did come from R&B, and so where my mind goes, I'm kind of running you through the process of how I did this. I went to Rodney and I said, "Hey, where'd you get your line of Madus?" And Rodney said, "I got the mail from Adam Tawfiq, who said that it was imported as a Madu, and I believe that was back in like 2010 and 11 around there that he said." And then I asked, "Well, where'd you get the female from?" And he's like, "I couldn't tell you. I got that animal as far back as 2008 and 2009, but
Yeah,
um,
we're talking 15 years ago. So
right." And he's like, there was, I wasn't given any information. I wasn't given paperwork and everything, but it looked exactly like what we know as a Madu. And I also want to give you kind of like the context of like zeitgeist, right? So back in the day, again, not a lot of people were tracking locality stuff, and it wasn't super duper important. So um, this was early enough on where he got the animals that the Madu wasn't lost in translation. And back then, Madus weren't selling for $5,000 a piece. There wasn't a reason for people to lie about locality data back in 2008 because these animals that were wild caught were selling for $200, right? So that's something I think that's important to note in terms of like even the Madus that we have today, that we are saying are Madus, um, as far back as we can go, like the person who then produced F1s from the wild caught and then was able to get a hold of those animals, and now we're producing F2s over at Reach Out Reptiles. um we there's still questions to be answered there, right? um so let's talk about Bali. I put Bali in here because Bali is pretty easily traceable.
I love how
um
they look, but yeah, I know nothing about the lineage. So
yeah,
jump off.
let me go into it. So most recently there was two clutches produced, one in 2018 and one in 2020 by Nicholas Berg. Just a discrepancy that I want to share with everyone. Everyone thinks that Nicholas Berg is part of Locality Core with Wolfgang. Not the case. um, Nicholas Berg produced those two clutches. There was another clutch that was produced in 2019 by Locality Core, Wolfgang. Out of those animals that produced those clutches, there were animals that came from Nodaho. That Nodaho imported these animals, and there were clutches in 2008 and 2010. Um, R&B Reptiles obtained a shipment from Mike Cole of Ballroom Python South. Um, and that shipment of animals Rodney sold to people around the country. And we really don't know where many of those animals are. Now,
I
the
could tell you the same about, the clutch of purple albinos or whatever was produced in the clutch my first snake came from. I'm one
right,
of the only people where you still know where one of those animals are.
right. And that's again, sadly, what happened to Locality Retics.
Well, and
They've
that's 7 years ago. So
right,
that's my point, is like, even though that was a little bit further back, like,
right,
this stuff gets lost and like miscommunicated and muddied real fast because
right.
some people just don't care.
Right. And that's what's good about lineage tracking. It's like, okay, well, we forgot names and everything, but these animals look exactly like the parents that were imported by A, B, and C. And so, we can get an idea of like what the animal should look like, right? Um, so, anyways, Nodaho had clutches in 2008 and 2010. R&B Reptiles worked on the other side of things, got the shipment of Mike Cole. But, anyways, the clutches that Wolfgang and Nicholas Berg produced back in 2018, 19, and 2020, one of the animals was from the Nodaho line. One of the animals was from the R&B line. So those two different lines were combined to make what we recently have been able to produce from 2018 to 2020. Um,
Is it
so
Noda? Sorry, this is just my brain just catching up, but is it Noda Ho or Noda How?
no,
I just knew someone with that last name and it was
maybe
pronounced How.
maybe it's Hal. I apologize. Again, these are names that
Again, like,
are.
I've been screwing up names this whole episode, so who am I to say anything?
I
But
mean, me and Nathan have not been in this long enough to actually like have an idea of probably big names in the industry that we probably should know their names, but we just don't.
well, big names in retics, but you know how the retic industry is. People come and go.
Yeah, yeah. Next one is the one that we want to give an example. So, by the way, all of these that we're reading, and we are giving you the information of what's recently happened and going back as far as we can.
We're
And
just
this is
trying to be as factual as possible.
right. And this is what you guys should be doing with the animals that you obtain, is what I'm trying to say, right? Like if
Yeah.
I, if me and Nathan in a few days can go back, talk to people, obtain all this information, um, then you guys can certainly do that if you're going to spend $2,000-3,000 on an animal. All right, so Bangtang Sula, Nathan, go ahead and cover that.
Yeah, so John Holflich produced clutches in 2018 and 2020. They were obtained, the original animals, again from R&B. That was locality's always been really important. And then R&B obtained those animals from Cameron up at Bushmaster.
Yeah. So again, that one is pretty easy to follow because John Hoflich is really Jonathan. He's really known for just spearheading the Bangtang Sulawesi locality. Those animals were obtained from Rodney, and Rodney got those imported from Bushmaster. As a matter of fact, I think Rodney says he still has receipts for the Bantangs.
Yeah, I mean, for my stuff, I was able to track some of my animals as far back as the Canadian importer who brought them into the US.
Yeah. So anyone who has any Bantang in them, I'm pretty sure that they all came from the same area. I know that the goat line was established from this same line,
Yep.
um, all that good stuff. So um,
Is that a project that's still continuing, or was that a one-off?
no. I know. I mean, there's a couple. I know Chris Hokie, Constrictor Cove on our Patreon. He's got some Bantangs that he's working with.
Well, no, no,
Um,
no. The goat line in particular, are they still trying to push that, or is that a one-off project that was just kind of a passion? Let's see what kind of
when I
animals pop out.
yeah, when I talked to Garrett last about that, and that was back like a year after they hatched. I think that was just kind of a one off. I think someone convinced him to kind of
Well,
do it.
someone. Brian Cusco.
Brian,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's like, if I could have a super dwarf that looked as good as this Bantang Sula, then I would have a super dwarf.
right,
And those two being good friends, I believe it was Garrett's just kind of pride in like, well, I'll make that for you and you will
right.
have a super dwarf. And I admire the hell out of that. That's cool.
No, and it was awesome because like Brian ended up getting like one of the best looking ones from the clutch that Garrett hand selected for him, and Brian didn't even pay anything. Like Garrett just gave it to him. It's a cute story. They're cute. It is. It
Bromances
was
are the best.
they are. Yeah, no, that's a great story, and I really like that you know, Brian recommended that project, and Garrett made it happen and was just like, here, happy birthday. Um so um Next example, I threw my line of Calato, not even a line. So lab line or whatever the case may be. Like it's really not a line because it was only it was two clutches. I have the only living animal from the first clutch, and then there's 13 animals out in the country. So in
Well,
terms of
and technically, even though I don't believe any of the animals survived, if I correct me if I'm wrong, but even though none of the animals survived, those animals were bred before.
um yeah. So yeah, they had not produced offspring that were living.
Yeah.
Um So I want to include this one, not to toot my own horn, because is an example of one that's like very quick and to the point. So it was very easy for me to get um, little. It was very quick for me to get information. So let's see here. So in 2021 and 2022, I produced F1s from two wild caught animals. I bought those wild caught animals from Samson Pruitt. Samson Pruitt got those animals from Fascination Herps. Fascination Herps imported those animals. That is Eric Keister. Eric Keister traded those animals to Samson Pruitt on a big trade. Samson Pruitt had those animals for only one season, and then I acquired them from Samson. Um, and so a very quick line. And again, I've said this before, but the way I went about that, Samson gave me this story. I reached out to Eric Keister without giving Eric Keister the story. He confirmed that it was based off of a trade. So things that I looked for to do that. Now I know Samson Pruitt right now is not a very good or trustworthy name, but I think what we're going to talk about later in terms of lineage, it's just important to note that as
I
much
mean,
as
it just matters that you get past the Samson and find out where those animals came from originally.
yeah, and as much as people don't want to talk about it, there's two lines that we know of right now of Coyote in the U.S., and if it wasn't for Samson, we'd only have one right now. So as much as we all definitely cannot stand the guy, um, screw him that we're even mentioning his name in this podcast. But as far as lineage tracking, it's relevant. All right, next one is another Kalatoa animal, Nathan.
Yeah, so Eric Lee obtained this animal around 2015 from Dennis McNarma. Wow, I cannot pronounce last names today.
McNamara.
McNamara. Okay. It's close enough to your last name. I feel like I'm just mixing the two. Who obtained those from LLC. Who's LLC?
Triple L Reptiles.
Oh, Triple L.
I put LLC.
Yeah, you
You're
put
right.
LLC. I'm like, a limited
Limited
liability
liability
what?
from Triple L Reptiles.
Yeah, so from Triple L, who is the identified importer. Um, I think that Triple L's been around long enough, and
They
back
still
then,
import stuff.
back in 2015, the big push for locality retics wasn't really there, so there's no reason on their part to lie.
Yeah, and that was just when Eric Lee acquired the animal um in 2015, and so this person, Dennis McNamara, got them earlier from uh Triple L Reptiles. And if I'm
Do
not
you know
mistaken,
what year that was? Because yeah, I was confusing that with the
I asked
2015 year, which in any case would just put it back further before
exactly.
the Lacey Act bans, which again, less reason to lie when these animals are going for a couple $100 a piece.
Right. Eric Lee wasn't able to tell me that. And that's not the only time that there's a Kalatoa out there that goes back to Triple L reptiles. So um, Triple L is still importing. They've done importation before. I don't know um, I don't know who they use or what they do, but I do know that they import. So
Well, and who
um,
knows if they're still using that specific importer because we can't
right.
import retics.
I know that that female died around 2021 that Eric Lee had, and I know that that female was responsible for producing. I think Eric Lee, you're gonna kill me if I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure the his 2021 clutch of the 87.5% marbles double het snows um that he produced that he's growing up right now to make I think what he's planning to do is
Yeah,
93.75%. Yeah,
it's a crazy project. I
right.
love the commitment he has in just trying to make these things as close to pure super dwarf as possible.
Right. Um, and again, we're just going through examples of tracing back lineages that are known. And this last one that we put here is the it's Coyotes, and specifically the Slitherline Coyote. So F2s were produced by me and Daniel Solis in 2022. The F1 Slitherline male was also used in 2020 by Garrett Hartle, who produced Coyotes. That was a Slitherline male to a Murdoch line female. Unfortunately, that female passed. Um, and so out there, you know, me and Daniel have produced F2 Slitherline, and Garrett used the Slitherline to produce what he did in 2020. Now, those were F1s that we all use. Samson Pruitt produced those F1s in 2018 and in 2019. Um, and Samson acquired those animals by Raul Diaz. And Raul Diaz obtained those animals from the importer, which is Dan Maleri at DM Exotics. So again,
Which is, in my opinion,
he's the top of the
just
top.
with
Yeah,
the connections, him living, in Thailand locally, being able to have personal relationships with these importers and these farms around where he's staying, it just gives so much more merit to any kind of locality data that might be attached with these animals.
it does. Now, one thing that I will mention, if anybody, doesn't matter who, if they say, "Oh, I have animals that were imported by DM Exotics," or "This is what it is," like Dan Maleri is super accessible. Confirm with him. Like he will be happy and talk your ear off. It'll be like 10 p.m. at your time and like 3 in the morning in Indonesia or whatever the hell the time difference is, and he'll talk to you about this stuff. So now, everyone, don't go calling him, please. But he's very open about this stuff. So if you hear that your animal originally, like, I don't know if you're buying an F1, F2, F3, whatever the case may be, if that breeder says these are Dan Maleri imports, just contact Dan Maleri. Have a
Yeah,
conversation with him.
contact him, but on your Madu or whatever that he had no part in importing. Just
Yeah. Don't, yeah. Only contact him if it's relevant to the animal that you're buying or that you have.
only if his name pops up.
Right.
We all know that he works with so many different species. He's busy putting out, I believe, 3 videos a week,
Yeah.
and still just staying on top of helping the community in terms of getting into new species, making sure that what they have is the correct thing from him. Just he's he's a man who's very busy, so don't waste his time.
Right. And let me emphasize this. The guy he's not a sponsor by any means, but if you are interested in actually understanding the importation exportation process and you're into locality species across the board, it's only $5 to join his Patreon, and he only has one tier. So go join his Patreon, because I joined it about 2 months ago, and it's one of the most informative things that I've ever done to actually understand the importation exportation process.
Yep.
Um Okay, so those are all of the different examples of how we were able to trace different localities to different sources to give you the background for someone to feel confident. And again, that was just by getting names, following up on names, following the quote unquote paper trail. And you guys are all capable of doing that. And I think if I was taught to do this by mentors. We are now trying to give you this information for you guys to do this. Because it's important. Because the last thing that we want to do is just um I don't know about you, Nathan, but when I was going through and I was digging through the different lines and everything, different localities, I really think that we think we have more than we actually do. And if we don't do our due diligence, we're going to live in this like utopia of what we want to believe when in actuality, it might not actually be what we think it is. And so I encourage everyone to do your part and just kind of follow the paper trail.
And it's a double-edged sword a little bit because with how bottlenecked we are with every single locality, just with importation being down,
Yeah,
there comes a time and point where everything's going to be inbreeding to a point to keep these localities alive.
absolutely. And I think that's where the Jampianus, you know, subgenus or species comes into place, right? So the Jampayas, the Calatoas, the Madus, Carampas, whatever the case may be. Um, scientifically right now, those are under Jampianus. And so um yeah, at some point that's it's gonna happen. And I just hope that at least here now that if we are selling a pure Calatoa, that we are representing it as such. I would rather that we intentionally begin to outcross and we know what we're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, real quick, I want to just wrap up some talking points. Number one, um, debunking the myth of paperwork being available. When you guys find paperwork for more than one or two people, let me know if that's a standard that we need to start applying. But as of right now, it's not going to happen that I'm aware of.
Yep. Step 2, show me those GPS coordinates, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And that applies for every freaking reptile and every species in the hobby trade. Um, Stop using that argument. You guys are like, it doesn't sound, um, when you guys are stating that argument, it sounds like you're almost trying to defend the illegitimate animals that you have. Really, like that's not a standard when it comes to being a keeper or a hobbyist. Now, if you're a scientist and you're coming into the retic world, cool, make that argument, but it's a little different in our world than it is in your world. Next point is kind of what we've been talking about in terms of like what is it that we value, just being able to go back as far as you can and making sure that the information is there. And use this video as an example of the animals that we are demonstrating to
Vizio is
you.
a TV, not what we produce.
Did I say Vizio?
You did.
Oh, son of a bitch. I felt a little slur there, so you called me out on it. Thank you. So use this Vizio, which is a video, to track the lineage, and see what you can come up with. Now,
Yeah. And I don't want to give too much away. You guys will have to stay tuned for next week. But we will be talking a little bit about the TK Kalatoa line and just some of the importation data and, just some of the information about uh, where that line has been and come from. Uh, and maybe just a tiny bit of a shadow of a doubt about what those animals really are.
yeah. So
So,
we're going to be dropping only facts. We're going to have up another screen. We're going to be having screenshots and information. And you guys next week are going to find out whether the most infamous quote unquote Kalatoa line is actually Kalatoa, or are there too many questions left unanswered. On that note, thank you everyone for tuning in. Shout out to our Patreon members and shout out to our sponsors. We'll see you guys next Friday. Nathan, anything else?
so we were talking about AKC earlier.
Mhm.
And if we wanted to start one for Retics, could we just call it OnlyFacts and have onlyfacts.com? Just an idea. We'll see you guys next week.
See you, everyone.